overwhelmingly. Can we now come to our next paper, which is item number 10, the Auckland Council Top Risk Register. And if I can ask Cecilia and Shivali to come to the table, please. The motion is simply to note the Top Risk Register, so I'll move that. Have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Filipaina and Cecilia, I think you're going to lead off, and we'll ask you to talk to it, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to introduce Shivali Kukreja, who is the Principal Risk Advisor, and she's going to lead off and say a few things about the report.
Thank you. Shivali.
Good morning, everyone. I think it's working.
Just lean into it.
It's not going.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to present the Council's Top Risk Report, which was considered and debated at the Audit and Risk Committee meeting in September 2018. Whilst the Top Risk Report is presented quarterly to the ARC, going forward, the committee will refer this report to the governing body as a standing agenda item. Some of you will already be familiar with the top risks from your attendance at the Audit and Risk Committee and or through the risk workshop that was held with the governing body members on 7th of June. Before we go into the questions on the top risk report, I would like to provide you with a brief overview of risk management at Council. Council has a risk management framework that outlines roles and responsibilities, governance and reporting requirements, and processes for risk identification, management, and ongoing monitoring. Risks are identified, reviewed, monitored, and reported regularly through a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Top-down includes risk identification and oversight at the executive level, and bottom-up is risk management activities that are undertaken by the departments and business owners. The top risk register is the outcome of the top-down approach. Risks have been rated using the 5x5 risk matrix as extreme, high, moderate, or low. Each risk is assessed on the likelihood of the risk occurring over a period of time and the impact of the risk if it occurred. It is based on discussions with executive leaders, subject matter experts, and taking into consideration external and internal factors. The risk ratings drive the appropriate level of effort required for ongoing management and monitoring of the risk, including engagement with stakeholders and subject matter experts across Council, and it also enables discussions on improvements required in strengthening or adding new controls. I would like to repeat this just so it is clear that if a risk is rated high, it does not necessarily mean that it is not being managed well or controls are not working. It highlights the level of effort required for ongoing management. The risk team regularly reviews the risks together with the business owners to assess the design and effectiveness of the controls and to confirm that the risks have been rated adequately. The results of these reviews are discussed and reported at the Audit and Risk Committee. I take the top risk report as read, and now I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Shivali. Do we have any questions? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not part of the Audit and Risk Committee, so forgive me if I maybe should have asked this question earlier. But it's an issue that came to me yesterday where basically raw sewage was coming out of a pipe in Meadowbank. And it looks as if that is actually a result of blockages in the system. And surely this is a major risk. Watercare, Healthy Waters are telling us it's happening more and more as people are flushing things like wet wipes and nappies down the toilet. I don't see it actually mentioned as a point, but as soon as you have raw sewage happening, that is absolutely a risk in my opinion. Do you think it's worthy of including in this report?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So we have got the quality of water supply noted as a risk, and the infrastructure built around that as being a really important element to prevent such things occurring. So from the risk register point of view, that's where we've tried to capture it. But in answering that, how we're resolving that issue, I would say it would be something we would take it back to the business who is taking, resolving this at this probably current point and bring it back to you.
So if I may just supplementary, Mr. Chairman. So there's two issues here. One is having the infrastructure that can cope with intensification and that's one issue. But the issue I'm talking about, even if the infrastructure is there, the abuse or misuse of that infrastructure is actually a definite health and safety issue. And I think those are the two. So I see your infrastructure issues here, but not potentially some of the education we may need to do around the misuse, thank you, Deputy Mayor, of people, which is causing health and safety issues with regards to allowing raw sewage to exit our pipes. Thank you.
So a comment rather
So
than...
it can be, the question is, can we add that? Now, is there a way to add other things, or are we just going to leave it as it is?
Cecilia.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the top risk register that you have before you is just that. There are a number of other departmental risks that sit underneath the top risks. So, for example, Healthy Waters would have, as part of their departmental risk registers, identify a number of these as potential risks for the community. For example, the incident that you've mentioned, and part of the controls around that I'm aware of is a campaign around the awareness and informing the community around disposals and what should and shouldn't go into either the toilet systems, etc. It is also part of the discussions that we've been having with Watercare. And Watercare and our remaining CCOs, significant CCOs, report their top risks through to the Audit and Risk Committee every quarter. So it's an issue that is highlighted, and not necessarily in the top risk itself, but will come through as part of the operational risks from that particular department or the or through Watercare, part of our CCOs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Thanks, team. Look, I'm trying to, wasn't at this committee, I'm not a member of this committee, just to reconcile the risk under climate change. And I'm trying to understand why climate change readiness and response overall has only a moderate risk. It's not extreme, it's not high, though in one category, I think it's the residual risk. It's identified as moderate, but the risk category is high. But then I'm reconciling that with your heat map, and your heat map gives it a likelihood of something over 25% as possible. Now the IPCC would contradict that entirely. So can you just take me through how you've arrived at the risk that which overall I think in your heat map you put as moderate, and what residual risk is as compared with the core risk?
So just in answering, through you, Chair, in answering the question around the residual risk and the core risk, so what we have come up with is that without the controls that we have got in place, or without the controls, how would we see the rate, how would we rate the risk, whether, and then without the controls we've rated it as high, and with the controls we believe it is currently moderate. But we do agree that currently this is a very topical risk for Council and rated as one of the top 10 risks globally. We are in the discovery stage at the moment, and we acknowledge that we are trying to understand still various aspects about climate change, its future impacts, as well as strategies for managing this risk better. So we are working with the Sustainability Office to better understand the impacts and controls, and this will be subject to our deep dive review process, where we'll really review the risk and assess the reasonableness of the risk rating, and that is supposed to be reported through to the Audit and Risk Committee early next year.
Okay. Would not just a simple desktop analysis indicate that it is the greatest challenge of all nations and particularly all cities. I mean, the International Monetary Fund has said, and it's well quoted, that it considers it the greatest economic challenge. The World Health Organization says it's the greatest health challenge, and the list goes on. And I'm just concerned that it gets a little bit discounted by being identified as a moderate residual risk.
Through you, Mr. Chair, one of the things that we are looking to do is to understand this better from the Council's perspective. So we do acknowledge that it is one of the top global risks. What we do in terms of the deep dive is to really unpack this from Council's perspective, and also unpack not just the causes but the impacts, and also what some of the controls that we might have. So we totally acknowledge that where we've got it currently is probably not sitting where it should be, and that's when we, through the work that we're doing, the deep dive, we would hope to bring that back to the Audit and Risk Committee and report that back to a governing body, and that's looking like, as we said, early next year, and that's in the program.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. All I wanted to say, because I think the report covers everything, and I'm not a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, but this was the June workshop was the most constructive workshop I have attended in the entire time of this Auckland Council. And Cecilia and your team, I really want to commend you. I think this summarises the issues brilliantly. And, you know, we could be wading through hundreds of pages of material, but this is a very good report, and it's been a very good process, and my congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, any comments in addition to the questions? I'm sorry, Wayne. Wayne, a comment or a question?
Sure, I really just want to support...
Well, let's move on to comments, so maybe you can throw it together.
These are comments, and I just want to support the comments that Councillor Darby made around climate change. I mean, risk is a function of probability times magnitude. And if we look at climate change, the magnitude that we're talking about far surpasses anything that is under consideration in terms of Council's future budget. So it may be that the probability at this point is a little lower than it might be, but the planet is on worst case scenario track, and we know that. And it would be useful to have some risk analysis around that, because certainly what I see across the organisation is a mismatch between projects that are under consideration and being floated, like for example, the downtown stadium, which, frankly, if we had a climate change adaptation strategy, which we don't, I would suggest that it would be a non-starter for a whole range of reasons. And frankly, the same thing applies to any number of other developments. So in my neck of the woods, we've got work proposed at Orewa Beach, but we don't have our climate change adaptation strategy. We haven't followed through on the Ministry for the Environment guidelines around how you manage coastal processes. So when I look across the organisation, and I could give quite a few examples, I don't see an integrated approach around this issue, which is climate change, and that goes to both adaptation and mitigation. So I would suggest its risk needs to be significantly elevated. And what would be wrong with that? It might actually force us into some action.
Thank you. Any further comments? This is an ongoing process. We'll have quarterly reports, and it's a movable feast in that respect. Richard Hills.
Thank you. And I've brought it up before at various committees, and I see Ollie's here in the back, but it's not really a question, it's just my continued concern about the violence against our staff members and people involved with council in various forms. It's one of our highest risks against staff, and it's not just verbal, there's a lot of physical abuse, and also the health and well-being of staff around the mental health area. But I know that the last 2 years there's been a serious ramp up in my discussions with the teams around support for staff and support for the people, which is great. And there's been a lot of positives coming out that, but I just want to highlight and probably thank our staff again for putting up with what is pretty horrendous abuse from the public, and it's unfortunate that that is happening, and I hope we don't end up turning to having to have our staff in behind screens and different things. So I really hope that reduces over the next year. Oh, well, as soon as possible, really.
Thank you very much, councillor. The motion is to note the register and the heat map, so that's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much to Shivali and to Cecilia.